Hey, what's up and welcome to this video tutorial where I'm going to be showing you the Unreal Interface. Now to begin with, I just want to say that I'm not going to be explaining every single button in detail. However, I will jump over and explain what each one of them does. And as we progress through these videos, we will then look at some of the core features and functionality in more detail. So really this lesson is more or less just to get you familiar with the interface and to get you started. So when you first start Unreal Engine, you're going to be presented with this welcome to UDK screen, and it's going to be a good idea to look at the get started and video tutorials, and it will give you a solid understanding of the engine here. So what we're going to do is we're going to close this, and the next thing that you'll most likely see is going to be the content browser, and we're going to close this and discuss that in later videos. So like any other Windows application, we have a menu bar, and some of the commands on there are going to be familiar to you, such as the fact that you can open and save your projects. But as you can see, as we scroll across to some of these other flyouts, there's some of these that are pretty extensive, and it reaffirms the reasons why I'm not going to be explaining what each one of these do at the moment. Below that we have, I guess, what they call the stack bar or the command bar, and this is basically where some of the most common commands that you're going to be doing throughout the creation of your game is going to be. So, for instance, the first two buttons here we have is directly relating to the fact that you can open and create new levels, and then the next following three are to do with saving, so you can save just everything in your level or just your packages and so on and so forth. The next two, you see we have these two arrows, and this is an undo and a redo feature. And again, we can either use these or we can use shortcuts. For instance, if we were to undo something, we can press Ctrl Z. So if we just move this and press Ctrl and Z, you can see that moves back into place. Next to that, we have our selection tools. So we can select, move, rotate. Then we have two forms of scale here. We have a uniform scale and a non-uniform scale. Now, additionally, we can skip through these transformation tools by pressing the space bar. So you can see that as I press space, we can manipulate through the different selection modes and transformation modes there. Next up, we have this drop down, and this relates to the reference coordinate system. So you can see from here we have two options. We have a local and a world. Next up, we have this Find Actors button, and if we click on this, what this is going to do is going to bring up a new box, and here we can search for any actors, or we can double click on one of these actors to go to it. So an example is if I double click this brush here, you can see we've got this red builder brush. If we double click that, we are going to be zoomed straight into that function there. Now, I'm not going to discuss what that does at the moment. We will discuss what the builder brush is in later videos. Next to that, we have the content browser, and this is the same browser that you saw when the engine first loaded. Now, alternatively, we can also do this by going to View, Browser, and Content Browser, and this will also bring up this same browser window. Next to that, we have these two options, and these relate to the fact that you can do a visual scripting, and in this case, it's called Unreal Kismet, and the next one is the way that you would implement cinematics or move objects, and this is done through Unreal Matinee. Now the next thing you see is this slider, and this slider is going to alter the clipping plane. So if we alter this down, you can see that the distance of the clipping plane becomes closer and further away. The next set of options here, the next three are to do with selection modes. Now we're not going to go into these just now, but basically we can select if we just want the ability to select things that are wholly selected or half selected. We can select things based on if it has a translucency material. So if you have a material, say for instance, like water, it may become difficult to select, and so on and so forth. And we'll go through these different selection modes here. Now the next one is to do with building. So we have these bunch of options here that deal with how we can build our level. So for instance, we can choose to build by geometry, or we can choose to build lighting and paths and so on and so forth. Now, I'm not going to jump into these right now. We will deal with these when we actually come to building these different elements of the game. But it's also worth noting that we also have two lighting options here, and the difference is that this lighting option is going to allow you to alter the quality of the lighting information that is going to be baked. So by clicking this, you'll see that we move through these different colored states, and these represent the difference in quality. And finally, the last ones we have over here are to do with how we can build our game in terms of platform. So we can choose to build for instance, you see here we can build for mobile, or we can build for iOS and for the PCs and so on and so forth. And lastly, we have this play button, and this is to allow us to play our game in the editor, but it's going to be windowed. So if I press this, you can see a new window will appear and we can play the game here. Directly underneath that, we have our viewport, and the viewport is this sort of big window here, and this way you see this floor and this cube and the sky and so on and so forth. But we also have a bunch of options above that, and these options relate to this viewport. So starting from the left, we have this little arrow down, and if we click this, it's going to bring a drop down. And the one I really want to make note of at the moment is if your viewport goes weird or something's gone wrong, you can simply go down to show and then reset defaults, and this will reset the viewport and all its options back to its default state. Next to that, we have this option that says P, and P relates to the fact that this is in a perspective mode. If we press this, you'll see that we move through the different orthographic views. So here we can see on the side, perspective, top, front, and so on and so forth. So that's basically what that will do. Now, the next up, we have this option that's going to be real time. So if this is disabled, we're not going to see our viewport in real time. So we can enable this. Now, the next few options I'm not going to discuss too heavily, but just to give you a brief overview, these are the different viewing modes. So for instance, we can choose to view our wireframes, or we can choose to view by just things that are things that are unlit, or we can choose things that are lit, and so on and so forth. And so we have these other options that we're not going to discuss, such as detail lighting and lighting only, and so on and so forth. And because these are really sort of debugging modes, some of these, so we can see the complexity of the lights, and this is going to help us debug the lighting solutions, and we can do the same here for shaders and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to discuss them in later videos. Now, moving on from that, we have this option that says G, and this is going to make the viewport appear as if you're in the game mode. So what I mean by that is, if you look around here, you can see that we have these transformation tools and builder brushes, and we can see we have this yellow box, which is a light mask post-process effect. Now, if we press this G, you can see that all that is going to disappear, and it's going to appear as if it would inside the world. Now, alternatively, we can also press the G key, and that will do exactly the same. Okay, so moving on from that, we also have these two options, and I'm going to skip over these for now, but one is basically, it says lock viewport, and the other one is lock selected to actor. And basically what these are going to do is just basically lock the viewport or lock an actor to the camera, so when the camera moves, the actor will move along with it. And this is helpful for moving objects around, but I wouldn't really use it. It's not really a recommended method. The next thing we have is this option that says level streaming, and this is to dealing with when you have multiple levels here. And then we also have the post-process, and when this is enabled, we're going to see post-process effects. So at the moment, we only have this light mask, which is classed as a post-process, but we don't really have anything that's visible at the moment. So in later videos, we may add a depth of field, and if this is enabled, we're going to see our depth of field, and if it's disabled, we're not. Next to that, we have this little square with this blue sort of bar at the bottom, and this relates to the speed of the viewport. So you can see here that I can move around pretty quickly around this little area, but if we had a very big and very expansive landscape, it may become that this speed is just not really cutting it for something that's really large. So what we can do is click on this, and each time we click on this blue bar, I guess, is going to fill up this box, and when it gets to the top, you're going to reach the maximum speed that you can move around. So you can see here, I'm really moving around much faster than I was before, as opposed to when I click it and I'm really sort of moving much slower. The next one is this play button, and it's not to be confused with the same play button here. This one is actually going to play the game inside the actual viewport as opposed to inside the editor. So this one is for the play inside the editor, and this one's for the viewport. So if we press this, we're still inside the editor. There's no floating window, but we're just moving around inside the actual viewport here. And lastly, we have this option that is to tear off, and if we click this, it's going to tear off this viewport. And this could become helpful in some instances, but I don't really use that. And all the way to the far right, we also have another icon. And when you click this, it's going to minimize this, and you're going to be able to see each different viewport. Now, alternatively, if we have a viewport selected, we can press the Alt and X key, and we're going to minimize whichever one is the selected window. So this is really useful if you're just working around and want to see where you're placing things and you are zooming real quickly. Okay, so along the left hand side, this first section that says meshes deals with the fact that we can create a terrain or manipulate textures along a surface. So for instance, we have camera, which is related to the fact that we are now viewing through the current camera. We have this option that says geometry mode, and so if I select our builder brush and I move this away over here and I go to geometry mode, we're going to be able to manipulate this object. Now I'm not going to discuss all this just for now, but just to give you a quick example, I can manipulate this actual brush, and then we can add this brush into the world as actual geometry, as you see over here. So we'll do that in just a moment. Next thing, we have these two terrain editing modes, and you can see that one's called landscape and one is called terrain. And the difference is that the terrain is a legacy feature, and so what this means is that this used to be the way that you would create a terrain. However, this new landscape mode is much more optimized for game, and so this is really what Epic Games recommends that you use. So moving on from that, we have this option that says texture alignment, and if we have a texture on the surface and we choose this texture alignment, we can manipulate the textures. We have the option for static mesh, and so this is just going to bring up some sort of options and settings that we can alter here. And so as we progress through these videos, we will actually discuss some of those features a little bit further ahead. And lastly, we have is this option that says foliage, and this is going to allow us to add foliage to the terrains in which we create. Now the next thing is that we have brushes, and this is the brush, and you can see that we altered this before, but we can start off with a bunch of primitives or standard sort of primitives and add these to the world. Now it's worth noting that we can also right click on these and we can manually select these options. So we can choose the X, Y and Z, for instance, for this cube. And if we right click on some of these other ones, we can alter properties that specifically relate to that. So for instance, the amount of steps and so on and so forth. So I can click back on cube, and you can see that this is this 256 by 256 by 256 cube we see here. And the next thing we have under here is the fact that we can add this into the world. So these are the CSGs, and so you can see we have CSG add, CSG subtract, intersect and de-intersect. So if we press add, it's going to add this geometry to the world, and if we subtract, it's going to remove it. And so we can have these other ones, the intersects and stuff like that. So if we choose to add this into the world and then we choose the intersecting, you can see that the brush has become to the size in which it was intersected, and you can see that it disappears when we choose the last option there. Now if we Control Z this and go all the way back to when that has disappeared, there is also some shortcuts. We can press Control and A and this will add, and Control S and that will remove that away. Underneath that, we have this option for volumes, and we'll talk about these a little bit further when we move on. But basically, a volume is applied also to the builder brush, and if we right click on this, we can see a whole host of different options that relate to this builder brush. So for instance, we can add a post-process effects and so on and so forth. And like I said, we'll move on to that as we progress. Next, we have a bunch of selection modes, and if you're familiar with other 3D applications, you can sort of grasp what these do. So we can say, for instance, select something, and then we can choose to hide everything that's unselected, or we can hide the things that is selected. And we can also invert the selections and unhide all. So we can say invert selections and hide, and then we can choose to unhide all again. The last two is these go-to buttons, and this is going to allow us to have certain shortcuts. So for instance, we can choose go to brush. So if we are over here, which is go to brush, it's going to go all the way to the brush. And we can also do the same thing if we have actor, so we can have something selected, and we choose go to actor, and it will go to that actor over there. So those are really the core tools of what we have over here. There are a lot of other options that can be covered here, and some of these options can also be right clicked and extended upon, and we will discuss them as we move on. Now, the last thing we want to look at is right to the bottom right here. We have these options, and these relate to the fact that we can scale either universally or on an X, Y, and Z plane. And we also have a bunch of options as we move over for snapping and alignments and so on and so forth. And as we progress through these videos, again, we will discuss those a lot further. However, this is the end of this first video, and now you have a good understanding of the interface. I'll see you in the next video.